There is, one theory that, I mean, if you're trying to come up with conspiracy theories for why is this, okay? Did the Saudis drop the price of oil? And Saudi Arabia is going to be hurt by this. This is a country that has always lived beyond its means. It's typically had debt. And back in the 80s, they upstated their oil reserves so that they could borrow more money from the IMF. And one theory is that fracking is a Ponzi scheme, basically. That you take, $1 million to drill a fracking well, and that fracking well may only contain $1 million worth of oil. So you start pumping that oil out, and then you pay back your investors. You say, "Hey, look, we got oil now," or say it has $5 million worth of oil. So you take out the first $1 million worth of oil, pay back your investors, and move on to the next well instead and drill another well. And it's kind of this cumulative thing. But that the time period that these wells will live is only 2, 3, 5, 10 years at the most. And as a consequence, and when they're gone, they're really gone. And so as a consequence of that, the fracking world is really fragile. And so there's a fellow by the name of Michael Snyder, who's posted over at theeconomiccollapseblog.com. I talked about this briefly yesterday, but I've been thinking about this all night. I've been digging into this, looking around. Op-eds, there's several op-eds on this over at Financial Times today right now about how China is being affected by this lower oil price. China is a net importer. Their imports over the last 15 years or so are up about 3 million barrels a day, but they're also a net oil producer. Their production is up almost 1 million barrels a day. So it helps parts of China. It hurts other parts of China. It helps Chinese industry. It hurts China's coal patch, or oil patch, as it were. And then the question is, what effect is this change in the price of oil going to have on other energy-based commodities like coal and natural gas? So one theory is that the Saudis are doing this to try to put the small independent frackers in the United States out of business. And not just the United States. Chevron showed up in Lithuania the other day, the one of the old Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, the countries that run from Finland down to Germany and Russia. And they showed up, they cut a deal for exploration for fracking with the government, and all of a sudden all these protesters showed up. And Lithuania is like, where did these protesters come from? We never had fracking protesters before. And the government now, the Lithuanian government, is alleging that these are paid protesters who are being put there by Gazprom, which is the big Russian gas company, because right now Lithuania buys most of its gas and oil from Gazprom. And so they don't want Lithuania to become energy independent. Might be. Or it might be that you've got an indigenous revolt against fracking. I mean, Denton, Texas, one of the most fracked towns in the United States, and in the middle of the most oil-driven state in the United States, Texas, just in the last election, passed a resolution banning fracking within the city limits. So anyhow, nobody really knows. But one of the things that Michael Snyder is pointing out is that when this kind of price shows up, then your frackers are in trouble. A lot of the frackers are small companies. These are, a lot of small, independent, wildcatting kind of operations. They bring in big companies like Halliburton or Chevron to do a lot of the work and to process the oil. But, there are a lot of small, independent operations. They fund themselves. They raise their money, not through an initial public offering, not by selling stock, but by selling bonds. In other words, by borrowing money in the commercial paper market, going out into the marketplace and saying, we want to borrow, $1 billion to frack Oklahoma, and we'll pay 5% or 3% or whatever. They typically pay more than, government bonds and things because they're junk bonds. These are small companies. They're high-risk bonds. So they may pay 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%. They pay a high interest rate. So what Michael Snyder is pointing out is that when the junk bond market starts to collapse, that's a sign that everything is about to go over the edge. And Shane and I were looking yesterday at there's a couple of junk bond electronically traded funds, a fund that aggregates all kinds of junk bonds together. So you buy into the ETF and you're buying junk bonds. And the two funds that we were able to find yesterday in the last week or so, since the price of oil has gone down, both of them have dropped quite substantially. So that's an interesting theory, which takes it back to, could it be the American banksters who are doing this? Or could it be the American banksters who are going to get hit by this? Because what Michael Snyder is saying is that typically when the junk bond market collapses, the broader stock market is just behind it, which then gets back to the idea, okay, what if it was John McCain and Lindsey Graham who went to Saudi Arabia? I mean, they went to Saudi Arabia and said, would you please fund a fighting force against Assad in Syria? And Saudi Arabia helped create, apparently, ISIS. So what if they went to Saudi Arabia and said, hey, will you collapse the price of oil? We want to mess with Russia, or we want to mess with Venezuela or Mexico, or fill in the blank. Could it be that there are party politics here? Could it be the Republicans manipulated this thing because they want the economy to crash, because they want the last 2 years of the Obama administration to be just like Herbert Hoover's last 2 years? Keep in mind, the stock market crashed in 1929 when Herbert Hoover was, freshly sworn in. Relatively speaking, it crashed in October. He was sworn in March. And, his legacy to this day is, he's the guy that crashed the stock market. Is that what's going on?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-536-2370.
Whatever's going on here, it is huge and consequential. It will impact all of our lives, and it may influence the future of the world.